Hello, Brubs. We're back with Ghost and More Ghost by Robert Arthur. 10 stories of ghost haunts, spooks, spells, and witchcraft for young people. And we will go to the second story, Mr. Milton's Gift. This story is going to answer a question you probably asked yourself 100 times, and you'll see when you finish that it's just about the only possible answer. Even though some of the things I'm going to tell you may sound a little surprising at first. The fellow I'm going to tell you about is Homer Milton, who was 33 when all this happened, a nice quiet chap who minded his own business and had been married for 8 years to a very pretty wife named Martha, whom he loved very much. Homer was a bookkeeper and his boss, Mr. Springer, was a tough egg who often kept him working late. This particular night, Mr. Springer had kept him even later than usual, and it was Martha's birthday, which is how Homer happened to step into ye old gift shop to buy her a present. Homer had never noticed the old gift shop before, but this particular night he was walking home from the office by a different route, and there it was, with a vacant lot on one side and a warehouse on the other. The place was dark except for a faint yellow light that gleamed through the dusty window, just bright enough to show up the words printed on the glass, "Ye Old Gift Shop." It certainly wasn't much of a place, even for a gift shop, but here he was, almost home with Martha, expecting a nice birthday present, and every other store in the neighborhood shut tight. So well, Homer stepped through the doorway. As soon as he was inside, though, he concluded he'd made a mistake. Inside, the place looked even less like a gift shop and more like a junk shop. In one corner was what looked like an egg, the size of a bushel basket, and hanging from the ceiling above it was a pair of old slippers with little wings at the heels. Homer could have sworn he saw the wings beat a couple times, but of course it was just a trick of the shadows caused by the old oil lamp hanging from the ceiling. There was more, but he couldn't quite make out what the rest of the stock consisted of, for it was covered with a fine assortment of webs. He'd seen enough, though, to make him decide to take his trade elsewhere when he heard the clearing of a throat behind him. Homer spun around. There, beside a long, dusty counter, stood the proprietor, looking at Homer. He couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. His eyes were on a level with Homer's middle coat button. Very cautious eyes they were, too, large and round and glowing yellow, like a jack-o'-lantern's, and set in a pointed face made to seem even smaller by 2 ears, uncommonly long and sharp. "Good evening, Mr. Milton," the fellow said very pleasantly. The yellow jack-o'-lantern eyes blinked once, and the pointed tip of one ear twitched. "Can I do anything for you?" Homer mumbled. "I was just looking for a gift for my wife, but I don't see anything suitable." And he started backing toward the door. He didn't make it, though. One long, thin arm shot out, seeming to stretch as if made of rubber, and caught him by the coat and pulled him back. "Now, sir," the strange proprietor cocked his head at Homer, the large yellow eyes glowing. "A gift for your wife?" "Exactly. Is she the nagging kind? Is she extravagant, talkative, greedy, or have you just grown tired of her for no reason, which often happens?" Why, no," Homer stammered. "It's nothing like that at all. No matter," the little fellow said, rubbing his hands with a dry, whisking sound. "Your reasons are your own. Whatever you want, we have it. Antimony, spirits of hemlock, silken nooses, henbane. Which do you prefer? If you'll let me make a suggestion, I advise you to take my own special spirit-away powder. Just dust it lightly over a sleeping wife and experience no further annoyance." "Why, I don't want any of those things," Homer said indignantly. "I love my wife. She does worry too much about making me wear rubbers in wet weather, and she cries if I forget her birthday or our anniversary. But outside of that, I haven't any complaint." "Extraordinary." The yellow eyes blinked twice. "Can't recall when a husband has said such a thing to me in centuries. I must think." This he did, resting a sharp chin in one hand and closing his eyes for several seconds. Then he beamed at Homer. "To be sure," he said, "you want to give your wife something as an evidence of your affection. A natural mistake on my part. I usually sell such gifts only for brides. So now, what kind of gift did you have in mind? Why, just a gift, Homer said. Something to show her I love her and to keep her satisfied so I can get the work done I'm taking home tonight. I was thinking of a silver cream pitcher. A silver cream pitcher? My dear sir, I don't deal in such articles. You said you wanted a gift, didn't you? Well, that's what I sell here, gifts. Now come, give me some notion what gift your wife would like. What does she seem to desire most in life or feel the absence of most keenly? By the way, call me Clarence. That's my name. Why, Mr. Clarence, Homer Milton mumbled, considerably bewildered by now. What she wants most, I guess, is for me to make more money. I'm not very good at asking for raises, and Mr. Springer is a very hard man to talk to. So, the gift of making money. Clarence rubbed his hands together. Now we're progressing. That would be a gift she'd appreciate, eh? If you had the gift of making money. Why, yes, Homer agreed, but that would be a gift I'd have to have. And, wait a minute, I'm getting all confused. We started out talking about one kind of gift, and now we're talking about another. A birthday gift. And the gift of making money aren't the same thing at all. Tut, tut, Clarence said. A gift is a gift. We deal only in one kind here, the genuine article. Of course, if you had the gift of making money, it would be a gift your wife would appreciate for her birthday. But by now, Homer's head was spinning. How could I explain to Martha that I had a gift for making money, which was a birthday gift for her? Because, oh dear, he groaned, I don't feel well. I have to go. Really, I do. I'll come back some other time. Clarence's hand darted out again and seized his lapel. Nonsense, the little man said. Have you $10? Yes, Homer gulped, but then it's a deal. Grasp my hand firmly. He thrust out a long, thin hand, curiously cool and dry to the touch, and Homer took it. He couldn't help himself. Shillings, pounds, and pence, dollars, dimes, and cents, Clarence chanted, his eyes closed. By this hand may you make 'em, even if you have to fake 'em. Abracadabra and so forth. The yellow eyes opened. There, the little man said, it's done. Spell enough for an easy gift like that one. $10, please. In a daze, Homer took out his wallet and handed over the money. Now, Clarence said, you're entitled to our free gift offer. Extra special this year only. One gift free with every gift you buy. Hold out your hand again. Homer tried to refuse, but Clarence grabbed it anyway. June, moon, love, dove, sigh, die, he chanted. Eyes tight shut. You're a poet. You will know it. Abracadabra, etc. Opening his eyes, he beamed at Homer. There, he said. Now you have the gift of verse, too. Only appropriate gift I could think of to match your name. Homer and Milton. Great fellows, both of them. Great poets, too. Well, I'm certainly happy you came in. Haven't had a customer in I don't know how long, and I was almost ready to shut up shop and move somewhere else. Come in anytime you want another gift. I have the finest stock in this hemisphere. The gift of gab, of music, of courage, of second sight, of optimism, of punctuality, all those and lots more. See you again, Mr. Milton. He gave a quick bobbing bow, and a moment later Homer found himself out in the street once more, wondering confusedly how Clarence had known his name. It was 3 blocks farther on before Homer was anything like himself again. He decided against trying to get his $10 back. No telling what might happen if he tangled with Clarence and the old gift shop again. One thing was certain, though. He'd have to keep the whole affair secret from Martha, and he still had to find her a present, too. Well, he didn't have any trouble with the present, as it turned out. There was a second-hand shop only a block from his apartment, and he caught the proprietor just as he was closing up. Homer bought a silver cream pitcher that the fellow had polished so you couldn't tell it had been used at all. They were both a bit startled when Homer said, I want a present for my wife, a silver pitcher or a knife, but then they grinned and assumed he had accidentally made a rhyme. Homer began to wonder a little, though, when he got home and handed Martha the pitcher and said tenderly, Just a present for my dear one. Hope it doesn't seem a queer one. It's nothing fancy, it is true, but it shows that I love you. Martha gaped at him, and flabbergasted, he gaped back. But then Martha laughed happily and patted his cheek. What a silly you are, she said, even making up a verse to go with it. It makes me very happy that you didn't forget what the day is, and I've cooked a special dinner for you. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, and peas, with ice cream for dessert. That sounds like a dandy dinner, though not the kind to make me thinner, Homer said with enthusiasm. Mashed potatoes and roast beef please me. Most beyond belief. I will probably soften stuff. Are you sure you have enough? Martha gave him a strange look. Homer, you're certainly talking very oddly. Even if it's just a joke, I wish you'd stop it. Certainly, dear, if it'll please you, Homer mumbled, unfolding his paper and plumping himself down behind it in his easy chair. I was only trying to tease you. Then, rather than risk any more conversation, he devoted himself to the sports page. But his mind was not on American League standings. His mind was back in the old gift shop, and a horrible suspicion was coming over him that Clarence, the odd little proprietor, but it wasn't possible. Simply wasn't. It isn't true, Homer muttered to himself. It isn't true. Such things can't be done to you. Then, realizing he had spoken in verse again, he shut up. Maybe it wasn't true, but just the same. Dinner was a strained affair. Martha kept glancing at him strangely, and for his part, Homer confined his conversation to monosyllables. By the time dinner was over, Martha was almost in tears. She pointedly put the silver cream pitcher out of sight, and when she had finished the dishes, she went off to bed without even saying good night. Unhappily, Homer got out the ledgers he'd brought home with him and tried to work on them. He had uncapped the beautiful Swiss-made fountain pen Martha had given him for a wedding present, the one that wrote in black, green, blue, or red. He had never seen another one like it in this country, and with it in his fingers, his work was usually a pleasure, but not tonight. His mind kept wandering. He found himself with Martha's scissors in hand, aimlessly clipping a sheet of notepaper into rectangles. Sternly, he focused his mind again on the ledgers, but his mind wouldn't stay there. He kept thinking of the old gift shop and Clarence, and wondering if... But the more he thought about the evening's strange happenings, the more bewildered he became. His thoughts kept chasing themselves around like mice playing tag. Then he came to himself with a start and realized he'd been sitting there, no telling how long, wool gathering and doodling with his fountain pen all over one of the slips of paper he'd cut out. He might as well be in bed. Breakfast the next morning did not start the day off on quite the right note, though Homer came to the table ready to apologize. Good morning, my dear. The day seems clear, he said. Coffee smells swell. Hope you slept well. I believe I'll decide to have my eggs fried. The beginnings of a smile fled from his wife's clear, youthful features. Her lips closed tightly, and a single tear squeezing from the corner of her eye was her only answer. Homer finished his toast and coffee, skipped the eggs, grabbed his hat and briefcase, and marched toward the door. Then he turned, as always, to kiss Martha goodbye. Homer, she said then, do you think you should go off to the office today? I mean, perhaps you're ill. Maybe you should go see Dr. Phelps. I thought you were just teasing me, but I am not even slightly ill. I have no need to take a pill, Homer said with dignity. If I've caused you any pain, I'm sorry, but I can't explain. Now, excuse me, but I'm late. Mr. Springer hates to wait. I really have to go to work. My job, I never shirk. Then, as the tears welled up in Martha's clear blue eyes again, he hastily closed the door. It was terrible, worrying her like this, but suppose he tried to tell her the truth. Then she'd be positive he was going out of his mind, and she'd worry twice as much. Homer tried to forget his troubles by plunging into work as soon as he reached the office, but he'd barely opened his ledger when the phone rang. It was Martha. Homer, she said tenderly over the telephone. You, darling, oh, I'm so ashamed of being angry at you, but what a funny way to give me such a wonderful present. What did you say? Homer asked, baffled. Repeat it, pray. I said you're a darling, leaving it on the sideboard for me to find after you'd left, and making me realize how bad-tempered I'd been and how good to me you really were. Now I can't talk anymore. I'm hurrying right downtown. She hung up, and Homer, rubbing his forehead, put the phone down. He couldn't imagine what she was talking about, but he didn't have time to think about it now because there was work to be done on the books, and Mr. Springer would want to see them as soon as he came in. So Homer plunged into his work. Luck was with him this time. The figures balanced easily, and Mr. Springer didn't show up until almost noon. By then, Homer had the books finished and was sitting back, daydreaming and doodling with his fountain pen. He was thinking, suppose someday he did acquire the gift of making money and got rich. First thing he'd do would be to take Martha on a second honeymoon, a trip around the world, and then Milton. Homer jumped. It was Mr. Springer himself, standing by his chair, looking down, his fish-like face very red. I've been calling you for the last 5 minutes. Sorry, Mr. Springer, didn't mean to linger. Homer mumbled and gathered up the books. Mr. Springer stalked into his private office, and Homer followed. Then for several minutes he just sat, while Mr. Springer, grunting occasionally, leafed through the ledgers. Presently, Mr. Springer stopped at an item. This $3,000 rebate for Willis and Company, he growled. What was that for? That's one easy to explain. It was just a damage claim, Homer said without thinking. Freight car in a wreck, smashed our shipment all to heck. We paid Willis, railroad paid us. No one made a bit of fuss. What? Mr. Springer's jaw dropped. Milton, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? No, sir. Homer gulped and closed his mouth before he could say anything that rhymed. Well, you're talking very oddly. He continued with the ledgers, looking suspiciously at Homer from the corners of his eyes from time to time. At last he came to the final page. All right, Milton, he began. Then his jaw dropped even lower than before. He was staring goggle-eyed at something on the final page. Nervously, Homer peered over to see what it was. It was a $100 bill pasted to the bottom of the ledger sheet. No, not pasted, drawn there. Just one side of it, of course, the side with Benjamin Franklin's portrait on it. But it certainly looked real. Mr. Springer's eyes popped. First he tried to pick up the 100, then he ran his fingers over it and found it really was drawn on the page. Milton, what does this mean? He thundered. Homer swallowed hard. Now he remembered doodling something while daydreaming about being rich. He must have drawn the bill then. It was a perfect $100 bill right down to the last fine pen strokes. Only he'd drawn it with a fountain pen on a page of a ledger. I don't know. I'm quite sure, Homer stammered. I know it wasn't there before. What Springer would have said to this, he never knew. At that instant, the office door burst open, and Miss Perkins, the receptionist, stood there, looking scared. Mr. Springer, there's 2 men here want to see Mr. Milton, but the men hadn't waited. They came right in, big men, solid men, with hard eyes and square jaws. Treasury Department, the first one said, we want to talk to Homer Milton. His wife's just been picked up for passing a phony $100 bill, and she says he gave it to her. Is that so? Mr. Springer said. There's your man. I always thought he had a criminal face. Now, excuse me. I have to call my auditors and order a complete check of his accounts. So, in practically no time, Homer was in the pokey, his mind a whirl of dismay and bewilderment. Of course they didn't haul him right down and toss him heave-ho through the jail doors. First they took him to a big, gloomy building, and there was Martha, red-eyed and sobbing. Oh, Homer, she wailed. Why did you do it? I told you I wanted nice things, but I didn't want them so badly you had to become a counterfeiter. I was happy, really. I was. And then she began to sob again. After that, the hard-eyed, square-jawed men questioned him, first one, then another. But the more Homer tried to explain about Clarence in the old gift shop with those jingly verses coming out every time he opened his mouth, well, you can imagine the results. We've got a hold of a whack, one of the men finally said warily. There's no such place as this old gift shop in the directory. And our men can't find any such establishment in that neighborhood. Put him in a cell and give him 24 hours to think it over. Then we'll question him again. Those awful rhymes are driving me crazy. They let Martha have one final word with him before they dragged him away. It's all my fault, darling. You did it for me, she said sobbingly, clinging to him and taking the press out of his coat with her tears. I don't care what you've done. I love you, and I'll stand by you. My sister's husband's cousin is Mortimer Flugel, the criminal lawyer, and I'm going to hire him for you right away. This evidence of Martha's love and affection cheered Homer up for a little while, but when he found himself alone in a cold cell, his spirits began to drop again. He was in a bad spot, and he knew it. Last night, he'd been doodling with his fountain pen on a slip of paper, only he hadn't just been doodling. Unknown to him, his hand was drawing a perfect $100 bill. Then later in the office, he'd been daydreaming and doodling again, and this time he had hand-drawn one side of a $100 bill on Mr. Springer's ledgers, all because of that silly charm Clarence had recited last night in the old gift shop. shillings, pounds, and pence, dollars, dimes, and cents. By this hand may you make 'em, even if you have to fake 'em. Hey, Milton, called the guard. You've got a visitor. Here's your mouthpiece. 10 minutes. Counselor. The cell door opened and closed, and Homer looked up at Mortimer Flugel, his wife's sister's husband's cousin. Mortimer Flugel was large and paunchy, with a chin that had been doubled and redoubled, and a pink face adorned by glasses on a black ribbon. He didn't just exude benevolence, he broadcast it. Well, Milton, said Flugel. Charged with counterfeiting, eh? Mighty good workmanship, too, I hear. Suppose you tell me about it. Homer shrugged dolefully. I bought a gift for making money. The gift would really be a honey if the money wasn't funny, he sighed. Phony. He stopped. Flugel was staring at him oddly. You're upset, the lawyer said soothingly. Suppose you start over and try again. Homer took a deep breath. I tried to buy my wife a present, something she'd consider pleasant. I didn't want her to be vexed, so I wound up getting hexed. A gift this Clarence fellow sold me, but the thing he never told me was I would be a counterfeiter. He stopped again, for Mortimer Flugel had backed away. It's all right, Milton, perfectly all right, Flugel said. Naturally, you're upset. I'll tell you what. Now, as I understand it, you claim you drew that phony century note with your fountain pen. Suppose you just demonstrate for me so I'll know how strong their case is. I've brought you some paper cut to the right size, and at Homer's look, he stopped. Yes, of course, Flugel burbled, backed right up against the cell door. Then let's do it this way. You write down all the facts instead, while I go chat with the boys. I'll be back in half an hour or so, and we'll map our strategy. He pressed some paper into Homer's hand, called the guard, and left hurriedly. Homer didn't blame him. He took out his fountain pen. But what was the use of writing anything? Who would believe the truth? And what else could he tell them? All he could do was plead guilty and go off to Atlanta or Leavenworth or maybe Alcatraz, and perhaps while he was in prison the hex would wear off. Homer had already served half his sentence in his mind when the cell door reopened and Flugel came in again. Well, got it all written out? Flugel asked, taking the oblong pad from Homer. Now let's just see. He stopped with a strangled noise that sounded like ark. He held up the pad and stared at it. Then he lowered it and stared at Homer. So it's true, he breathed. You said you had a gift, my boy, but it's more than a gift. It's sheer genius. What? Homer asked. What are you talking about? Flugel. Or are you just blowing like a bugle? Flugel ignored the insult. This, my boy, he said. I'm talking about this. He held up the pad. And Homer turned slightly green. While he was daydreaming, he had turned one of those pre-cut slips of paper into another $100 bill. He snatched for it, but Flugel put the pad in his pocket. Now, Milton, calm yourself, he crooned. I'm not going to mention this to anybody. Instead, I'm going right up and bail you out myself, even if the bail is $25,000. We must have a conference about the gift of yours, Milton. We really must. That is how it happened that an hour later, Homer Milton was driving across town with Flugel himself at the wheel, a gleam in his eye that Homer didn't like. Now, Milton, Flugel said, I'm not going to ask you how you do it, how with an ordinary fountain pen you can whip up a bill that could fool the treasury men, is your secret. But you have a gift, no, a genius, and it must be properly harnessed. The thing that tripped you up was the paper. Now it just happens that I have another client who has also had a little trouble with the authorities, but in his case, it wasn't the paper. It was the engraving that stopped him. So it occurred to me, why shouldn't I introduce you to each other? He has a fine stock of paper, and you have the ability to make that paper worth something. What you and he do is a business way after I've introduced you is no concern of mine, but I predict you'll both do extraordinarily well, and I hope you won't forget it was Mortimer Flugel who brought you together. As for the present little trouble of yours, I've already got 3 different lines of defense mapped out, and there's always insanity to fall back on. If we need that, all we have to do is put you on the stand and let you start your story about that little fellow you call Clarence, and it's in the bag. He put a large, soft hand reassuringly on Homer's arm, but the truth is Homer wasn't listening, for they were driving down a dingy, badly lit street near his apartment, and all of a sudden he saw a shop that looked familiar. As they came abreast of it, he saw he was right. There was the words on the window, "Ye Old Gift Shop," and a single light inside, just barely visible. "Flugel," Milton shouted. "There's the shop, so come to a stop. Step on the brake, you legal fake." "What?" Flustered Flugel brought the car to a stop. "What's the matter, Milton?" But Homer did not pause to bandy words with him or verses. He opened the door and leaped to the sidewalk. "Milton," Flugel wailed, "come back here. I put you on your bail out of my own pocket." But by then, Homer was halfway down the block. He reached Ye Old Gift Shop and hurled himself through the door. "Clarence," he skidded it to a stop in a dusty gloom of the interior. "Show your face, or else I'll start to take this place of yours apart. To you I'll dearly want to speak, so away, don't try to sneak." Two jack-o'-lantern eyes popped up from behind the counter and blinked at him separately. "Good evening," Clarence said, the pointed tip of his right ear twitching twice. "Why, it's Mr. Milton. Come to buy another gift? Dear me, just when I was closing up my shop and moving to another location, too." "No," cried Homer, "I want you to just take them back. I can live with money's lack, but free me from this dreadful curse of talking thus in awful verse and penning counterfeited money. The fix I'm now in isn't funny." "I'm sorry," Clarence said firmly, "but I can't do it. All sales are final. If I didn't make that rule, people would be forever trying to get their money back. You know how people are, never satisfied." Well, at that, Homer got even more excited, and he almost exploded trying to explain to Clarence that he didn't want his money. He just wanted to give back the gift. All the explanations came out in those jingling verses until Homer almost screamed from sheer frustration. And in his excitement, he said some things he shouldn't have, because Clarence drew himself up to his full 4 feet and told Homer he couldn't take back any goods. He was closing up shop, and there wasn't room in the crates for a single item more. "Going to try the 16th century this time," Clarence said. "They'll have more faith in my merchandise. Nobody believes in me in this century of yours. Nobody but you, and even you aren't satisfied. Now, goodbye, Mr. Milton." Homer looked around and saw it was true. The shop was empty except for several big packing cases already nailed up, and one Clarence was just getting ready to close. He started to put the lid on, and at that Homer became more desperate than ever. He began to beg and plead in such heart-rending verses that at last Clarence weakened. "All right," he said, "just to be obliging, I'll exchange one of the gifts for any other gift you choose, but I can't exchange them both, and I can't take them back. It's impossible. This is my first sale, and goodness knows when. And if I check in at the home office without even one sale on my books, I may not get another chance. So that's the best deal I can make, and I'm stretching things to do it. Now, which gift do you want to return, and what do you want in exchange for it?" Homer didn't even have to think. He said he'd keep the gift of verse and turn in the gift of making money, because no matter what people thought, they couldn't put you in jail for talking in rhyme. Then he named the gift he'd take in exchange, so Clarence took his hand and mumbled, "Dibbery, dobbery, flummery, flobbery. Even exchange is no robbery." "There," he said, "it's all done. And don't worry about what happened today. Now that the gift's gone, the evidence is gone too. Well, goodbye, Mr. Milton." With that, Clarence put the lid into place on the last crate and hammered it down. And with the last hammer blow, Clarence and the crates vanished, and Homer Milton found himself standing alone in an empty, dusty store. Even the lettering, "Ye Old Gift Shop," was gone from the window. When Homer's case came up for trial, there wasn't any evidence against him, just a blank piece of paper nobody would believe had once been a counterfeit $100 bill. So the judge let him go, though he gave him a very stern talking to first, to which Homer answered not a word. In fact, from the moment he stepped out of Ye Old Gift Shop, that second time he scarcely opened his mouth except to eat. No matter what was said to him, he just smiled and didn't answer. He's never been in any trouble since, and you may even know him, a very nice-looking chap in his late 30s, going just a little bald, with an extremely attractive wife who does all the talking when they're out together. The reason for that is because they're in Ye Old Gift Shop. When he realized he had to keep the gift of verse, he chose the gift of silence, too. So the two pretty well even each other out, except at home, where Martha has got quite used to hearing Homer comment on the day's news in couplets and quatrains. And in fact, listening to Homer discuss the Giants' chances for the pennant is as good as hearing someone recite Casey at the bat. Martha would be quite upset if Homer ever changed, because she soon saw where his talents could be put to a commercial use, so she didn't let him go to bookkeeping. Back to bookkeeping. She steered him into a new line, and now Homer is just about a millionaire. You know, all those thousands of greeting cards that are sold for Mother's Day and Father's Day and Christmas and birthdays and anniversaries and just about every other day? You must have asked yourself 100 times where they get all the inane verses on those cards. Well, here's the answer. 80% of them are written by Homer, Milton. Next time you get one, read the verse out loud. You're almost sure to recognize his style. And that story sucked. Honestly. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't more. I guess it was magic, but tragically magic. What a piece of garbage that was. All right. Well, hopefully this next story is better. Goodbye, bruv. Good boy.